You've probably spent time planning out your day before. Maybe you wrote a to-do list, blocked out your calendar, decided exactly when you do each task. It felt good. It felt like you were setting yourself up for success. But then the day actually started, and within a few hours, the plan fell apart. You didn't follow it. And it wasn't because something urgent came up. You just didn't do what you said you would. This happens to a lot of people, and it's easy to assume it's about discipline or commitment. But that's not really what's going on. The act of planning itself can actually make you less likely to follow through. Not always, but more often than you'd think. When you plan your day, your brain experiences something that feels like progress. You've thought about what needs to happen. You've organized it. You've made decisions. That mental work creates a sense of accomplishment before you've actually done anything. And that sense of accomplishment can reduce your motivation to do the real work later. Research into goal setting and behavior shows that when people announce their intentions or spend time elaborating on their plans, they sometimes feel like they've already taken a step toward the goal. The planning feels productive. It feels like forward movement. And because it does, your brain treats it as partial completion. This is called substitution. Your brain substitutes the planning for the doing. Not consciously, but the reward you get from making the plan can satisfy some of the same psychological needs that actually completing the task would. So when it's time to do the work, the urgency isn't there anymore. You've already felt the sense of control and clarity that planning provides. Let's say you decide tonight that tomorrow you'll work on a project from 9 to 11 in the morning. You write it down, you visualize it, you feel organized. When 9 o'clock comes the next day, you don't feel the same pull to start. You've already thought about it. You've already engaged with it mentally. The newness is gone, and so is some of the motivation. Or think about someone who plans their entire week on Sunday night. They block out time for everything. By the time Monday starts, they're not energized by the plan. They're tired of thinking about it. The plan has become one more thing to manage rather than something that helps them act. There's also the issue of inflexibility. When you plan your day in detail, you're making predictions about how you'll feel and what will happen. But your energy, your focus, and your circumstances change throughout the day. A plan made in the evening might not match the reality of the next morning. And when the plan doesn't fit, you're more likely to abandon it entirely than to adjust it. This is why rigid plans often fail. They don't account for the fact that you're a different person at different times of day. The version of you that made the plan was thinking clearly and felt in control. The version of you trying to follow it might be tired, distracted, or dealing with something unexpected. Those two versions don't always align. Studies on self-regulation suggest that people have limited mental resources for decision-making and self-control throughout the day. When you create a detailed plan, you're front-loading a lot of decisions. You're deciding in advance what you'll do and when. That takes effort. And by the time you need to execute the plan, you've already used up some of the energy required to actually do the work. Here's the uncomfortable part. Planning can become a form of productive procrastination. You're not avoiding the work in an obvious way. You're engaging with it. You're thinking about it. But you're thinking instead of doing. And because thinking about work feels responsible, it's easy to convince yourself that you're being productive when you're actually just delaying. This doesn't mean planning is useless or that everyone who plans is avoiding work. Some people benefit from structure. Some tasks require coordination and forethought. But for a lot of everyday work, the planning becomes more elaborate than the task itself. And when that happens, the plan is serving a different function. It's making you feel organized rather than helping you act. There's also something called the planning fallacy. People consistently underestimate how long things will take and overestimate how much they can fit into a day. So when you plan your day, you're often setting yourself up for failure without realizing it. The plan looks reasonable when you write it down. But it's based on an idealized version of how your day will go, not how it actually unfolds. When the plan inevitably doesn't work, you feel like you failed. But the plan was never realistic to begin with. You didn't fail. The plan did. This doesn't mean you should never think ahead or organize your tasks. It just means that planning and doing are not the same thing. And treating them as equivalent can create a gap where you feel productive without being productive. The people who tend to get things done aren't always the ones with the most detailed plans. They're often the ones who start before they feel ready, who adjust as they go, who don't wait for the perfect structure before they begin. Planning can help, but only if it leads to action. And too often, it replaces it. So if you've ever made a great plan and then didn't follow it, this is probably why. You're not undisciplined. You're not sabotaging yourself. You're just experiencing a normal psychological quirk where the act of planning feels like enough. And once it feels like enough, the actual work becomes harder to start.